This week on London Real, we have Jamie Bartlett, author of The Dark Net, Inside the Digital Underworld.
I just want to write stuff that gets people thinking. Security is the basis from which all our other liberties ultimately flow. The government officials of our time, they have no clue. You need to be tough enough to accept that people are going to say things that you find offensive. The real secret of the Silk Road is actually customer service. If you create an anonymous marketplace, you sort of don't get to decide what's bought and sold there. Three girls on a bed, ready to perform. Human behaviour is just so damn unpredictable.
London Real presents Jamie Bartlett, Inside the Digital Underworld.
We're going to have to take more responsibility ourselves over what we do.
I'm here in Green Park in central London. Behind me is a fantastic memorial for the Canadians that died in the First and Second World War. And you can see they've still got some poppy wreaths here below me. We just had Remembrance Day about a month ago here, which is a very big deal in England. It's something that's thought a lot about. It was I think a million that died in the First World War, and the Second World War casualties were very high as well. And so it's something that's thought about a lot in this country, and you kind of forget that when you're from America, that the war was really close here, and it was something that hits home and defines the people of this country to this day. So it's nice to get out to West London and show you a bit more of the city that I love. My guest today is Jamie Bartlett, who is a fascinating guy, and I think it's probably my most favorite episode of 2014 because I had this fascinating talk with him. He is the author of a book called The Dark Net, Inside the Digital Underworld, and he's a very intelligent guy who's spoken at Google and on RT and many other places, who decided to go underground inside the dark net and find out what's going on the interweb out there, and all those things you hear about. He did a variety of things, some legal, some not. One of those is he went on the Silk Road and he purchased a small amount of cannabis and talked about how his experience was using Bitcoin and how shockingly surprised he was with the fantastic level of customer service that happens when you have a marketplace based on customer satisfaction and real commerce and supply and demand and capitalism. And so it was fascinating to discover what he found there. He took it further. He went to some streaming webcam porn actors and sites and hung out with some young ladies that made their living on the back of this and found some interesting things about them that quite surprised him. And he's all about kind of finding out these nameless and faceless people that we hear about all the time that use the web in bad ways and finding the stories behind them. And he took it even further, and he spoke to someone who was convicted of owning child pornography, and he tried to break down how these people get to that level. And it's a really deep discussion, and it's a heavy discussion, which is what we like to do here at London Real. And he's a really fascinating guy. He reminds me of John Ronson, the author of the book The Men Who Stare at Goats, and the movie recently you might have seen, Frank, with one of my man crushes, Michael Fassbender. And because Jamie puts himself in the story. So he goes out and watches the girls on the webcams. He goes buys the weed. He goes and meets with the neo-Nazi activists in Britain, and he tries to get their story. So I really like Jamie. I hope we see him back on the show again. And it's a fascinating book, very interesting. He also commented about lone wolves and the ISIS's use of social media for their terrorism ideas. And he was writing about this even a year ago. So he was really busy the day. I think he was going to the BBC and going here, and he was writing for the Telegraph because he was very much in demand, because he writes about how people use the internet in, the not so nice ways, not the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons of the world. So it's a great show. I think you'll really enjoy Jamie. It was fabulous to have him. I could have talked to him for another hour. So I think you will enjoy that. I'm strolling more through Green Park. We got Buckingham Palace in the back. I'm going over to the Ritz-Carlton in about 10 minutes to meet with the $50 billion man, Mr. Dan Pena himself. I am 1 month since the Scottish seminar, the QLA, Quantum Leap Advantage, where I went up to Scotland. And let's be honest, my performance is is unacceptable, and I'm about to hear that from Dan, so I can't wait to go to that meeting. So let me finish up with this pre-roll. I just want to thank our longtime sponsor, the folks at Bulletproof, who supply the coffee that I drink every day, which is one that's free of molds and toxins. I mix it with my Kerrygold grass-fed butter and some brain octane oil, and boom, I have my breakfast, my liquid nutrition in the morning. Keeps me focused, keeps me pumping out this great content to you. And the Bulletproof Diet Book is now out, so you can buy it now on Amazon, and you can order it here at Amazon in the UK. I think it ships in a couple weeks. So get one for your friends, get one from your family, and get your diet sorted out in 2015. Get off that gluten, get off that high fructose corn syrup, get on that coffee, and start thinking with your brain and doing the intelligent things with your body. So I love those guys. I'm also loving the Unfair Advantage a product from Bulletproof. It comes in these ampules. It looks pretty interesting when you take it. So check that out, and big thanks to the boys at Bulletproof. And that's it. We got more exciting stuff coming for 2015. If you've got guest ideas, hook me up, Brian@londonreal.tv. While you're on the website, check out our gear section. We got coffee cups, give them to someone for Christmas. We got hoodies as well. Send one to your friends, get one for yourself. Free shipping from the guys at Chargrilled, and we'll have more products coming soon. Just show your people that you're doing something with your dome, watching the guys at London Real, and expanding your mind. We got great episodes coming up, including Mr. James Cosmo, who you would have seen in the movie Braveheart, and you would have seen in the tiny television show called Game of Thrones, where he is Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. It's one of the perks of my job, is I get to hang out with these OGs like that, Scottish OGs. So it was a real pleasure speaking with James. He had some fascinating thoughts on Scottish independence, a career, acting, and things like that. And his new film, The Pyramid Text, is off the charts. So there you go. I've had a very, very quiet and peaceful and somewhat lonely walk here in Green Park. Another one of London's treasures. You can go a bit further there, and there's some fantastic war memorials. And there you go. I'm not even being funded by the tourism board, but that's what I do. So now I'm going to leave you with Mr. Jamie Bartlett, and we're going to go deep into the dark net. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Jamie Bartlett, who is the author of The Dark Net, Inside the Digital Underworld. You are the director of the Center for the Analysis of Social Media at the think tank Demos, where you head the Violence and Extremism Programme, which researches a range of terrorist and extremist groups. To research this book, you immerse yourself in the dark net, buying marijuana from the Silk Road, watching the production of internet porn, and meeting British neo-Nazis. Jamie, welcome to London Real.
Thanks very much for having me.
My pleasure. The more I read about you, the more I like you. You have a kind of a John Ronson, Louis Theroux way of just, getting into your content. And I think it opens people's eyes up. So it's kind of a refreshing, take on things. So it's been nice to see that.
That's what I was going for, actually.
It was,
and you're
okay.
one of the first people to spot that.
Really?
So I thought that I really like Louis Theroux and John Ronson. I love the way they try and immerse themselves in these weird subcultures and sort of understand the people, the protagonists, why they're doing what they're doing, and see them objectively, not patronizing them, not trying to judge them, but just understand how their lives work. And I just thought there was something that we sort of missed that online. We have never seen anybody doing the same thing with these internet subcultures. And so when I set out writing this book, The Darknet, that was exactly what I had in mind. I'm going to do something like a John Ronson, but I'm going to do it online. I'm going to get into all the sort of shocking, hidden, obscured subcultures that we always hear a little bit about, and get myself right into them.
And you've done it, and John Ronson's been there in that seat, and he's everything you would expect him to be. And it's gonzo journalism. He gets right in there. And what I found fascinating about what you do is you take these two-dimensional images we have of, the sex worker online, the child pornography consumer, the neo-Nazi, and then you kind of go in and show the real stories behind what you found. And I want to get into the normalisation and, how you found that you felt empathy for some of these people. And I want to get into all of it because I think it's a fascinating side. Like you said, it doesn't get reported. The news says these people bad, but we never get to meet them. And online, like you said, they're almost anonymous. So
that was, I suppose, part of the motivation here as well. I'm sick of seeing these two-dimensional characters, because every time I see something, a story about some kind of online predator or the neo-Nazi or the drug dealer or whoever it is, I just always felt the human element was missing. We never really knew who they were or why they did it or what else they did in their lives or what they looked like, or were they married, where did they live, why did they get into this? But that is a central part of understanding why people do what they do on the internet. So you're never getting, it's literally sort of two-dimensional because you're just looking at it on a screen. And so I suppose alongside the sort of the Ronson aim of this book was really to get up close and personal with the people themselves, spend time with them offline, trying to understand what they get, or I suppose really what they miss in their offline worlds that they find in their online ones.
Right, and you're talking about kind of the online personalities of some of these people. And I kind of want to go through the stories, but I saw something that you tweet today, and I kind of wanted to address this issue before we get deep into the book.
What have I said?
No, it's, you're a man in high demand these days, and I think it's because of some recent news that came up over the killing of Lee Rigby last year, who, was a British off-duty soldier that was hit by a car and then stabbed and hacked to death by, I guess you describe him as Muslim extremists, I guess you would. And now it seems there might have been a Facebook message passed between the killers, and everyone is kind of asking what's happening. They're asking you, and you tweeted out, quote, predicting who of those that post extremism online will act isn't like finding a needle in a haystack. It's like finding a specific piece of hay. What's your take on, is Facebook responsible for this? Did MI5 not act? You wrote an article about this a year ago in the Huffington Post.
I did. And no, I don't think Facebook is responsible for this. In the same way that this committee that reported yesterday, this independent committee that was looking at the intelligence failure, I suppose, that led up to the murder of drummer Lee Rigby, they found that it was while there were some mistakes made, MI5 could not reasonably have stopped this murder from taking place, and the reason for that is the way terrorists operate has changed rather a lot in the last couple of years. Now there's very little planning involved, there's very little coordination. Let's think about it. It takes one guy with a knife to go out on the streets and murder someone and say, I'm doing it in the name of religion. That's an act of terrorism. It takes 5 minutes. You need no planning or preparation whatsoever. And we can't stop that from happening. As much as I wish we could prevent these things, it is simply not possible. Now, the added difficulty for someone like Facebook is they have millions upon millions of users, many of whom are posting very aggressive, virulent, hate-filled content. Of those, a tiny number may go on to do something about it. And I've spent years trying to understand, can we predict from what people are saying online who those people are that might take it a step further? And for all my best efforts, I'm afraid I just cannot tell you. And I don't think Facebook can tell you, and I don't think MI5 can tell you. I don't think anybody can tell you, because human behaviour is just so damn unpredictable. So I think it's unreasonable to expect Facebook to be trawling through every post that anybody on its site ever makes, and then trying to pick out those that it thinks are a problem and pass them straight over to the authorities. It's just not going to work.
And you cover this like in chapter 2, lone wolves. And yeah, the interesting thing about the lone wolf attacker is their tradecraft is usually quite basic. It's very minimal. They've maybe read it online, or maybe they have nothing, and then they act kind of in an independent manner, and it's not a coordinated attack. I think any attack on the U.S. since 9/11 has been lone wolf style.
Well, and in a sense, that is a mark of how successful the intelligence agencies have been at preventing the big attacks. The reason terrorists are now sort of reduced to these smaller, more rudimentary types of operation is because they cannot any longer prepare these big attacks, because the intelligence agencies have got so good at stopping them. And so as a result, it's a sort of slightly strange irony. It's become harder to stop the smaller attacks because that is where they see that they have no choice but to do that kind of thing, because people like Michael de Blasio would prefer to put a bomb on London Underground and murder hundreds of people, but he cannot do that.
Right, because he couldn't get the sodium
nitrate. He wouldn't be able to prepare it. He would,
right.
you know, and so as a result, we're talking about things that are very simple and easy to do, and it's in a way remarkable that there's been so few attacks of this type.
Yeah, I agree with that. A lot of people don't want to talk about that, but I do agree with that. Especially people kind of on the left, they don't want to kind of give the credit where it's due, but it is true. Mm-hmm. And in the U.S., they, you know, when there's this tries to organize or acquire a large quantity of explosive, you know, they usually run into someone, FBI or CIA or something. So
yeah, you know, the intelligence agencies, they're like a good referee at a football match. You don't hear from them, you don't see anything, but the match just carries on smoothly and it flows, and then if they make a little mistake, all the attention's on them.
Right.
And that's, I suppose, the way that it should be, but as a result, I think sometimes we sort of forget just how hard their job is and how good they are at it.
Right.
Yeah, sure, they overstep the mark sometimes, but ultimately, it's to me anyway, and it's my political worldview that security is the basis from which all our other liberties ultimately flow. So it is pretty damn important, even if, yes, internet privacy and all the rest is important too. To me, I suppose I'm getting older and I'm more conservative than I used to be. And I sort of think I understand how important that is for society.
No, that's a refreshing point of view. I've had a lot of whistleblowers in here that would disagree with you, but that's good. That's why we have this show. I was wondering if you could tell me about what you've seen and what has impressed you or not with the recent, use of social media by groups like ISIS. It's one thing I remember noticing when, Al-Qaeda moved into Yemen, they started doing some very interesting things. They were producing like an English language monthly magazine that was produced by, I think, an American or ex-American. I forgot the name of it.
Inspire?
Inspire. What a great name like that. I could never get a copy of that.
Yeah.
Maybe I didn't go on to tour or something.
Yeah.
But it was an amazing, it was like a magazine and they were encouraging people. But ISIS seems to have really taken that to the next level. What do you see when you see their use of social media?
I'm torn on this question because on the one hand, there's no doubt that they have worked out pretty quickly how useful social media is as a way of propagating their message. Yeah, they're very, very smart at using Twitter. They've worked out how you get subject matter trending. They've built their own apps. They use far more than just Twitter. They will use a range of different platforms. They use Tor browsers as well. They use open source encryption software, and they do this in quite a coordinated way, sometimes, and sometimes in a very clever decentralized way, so that anybody can contribute to the sort of jihadist noise online.
Right.
Now, that's all rather impressive. It's certainly a step forward for the Islamist movements. Although Al-Qaeda, like you say, they've always been looking for ways to exploit modern communications. And actually, this is why I'm torn, because it is often those extremist groups who are quick to pick up on new technology. It's the far-right group, the English Defence League or the British National Party, that are miles ahead of the big political parties at how to exploit Facebook to organise demonstrations, miles ahead of them. I would say that the Labour Party could learn a thing or two from how the British National Party has gamified its social media content to create competition between users about who can share the best content. We're talking about pretty smart stuff here. Now, the other thing, though, that slightly prickles me when I hear it, that these ISIS operatives are social media geniuses. They're like Shoreditch advertising types. I'm afraid that is not completely true, because what they are doing is actually pretty standard stuff for anybody in their 20s from the Western world. And that is who these people are. They're young men. They're young men in their 20s, most of them. For goodness sake, if they haven't worked out that to get stuff trending on Twitter, you use a popular hashtag like iPhone 6, then on what planet have you been living, for goodness sake? So obviously these guys know what they're doing. They're men in their 20s. How would they not? Building an app is pretty simple for these people. What's surprising is I think the journalists of our time, the government officials of our time, they have no clue. So they're looking down at ISIS thinking these people are geniuses, while everybody else in their 20s is thinking, well, they're just doing what the rest of us are doing. There's no surprise there.
Right. They're almost an ultimate startup, aren't they? They're using whatever resources they can on a very low budget, and so they use the media and the social media, whereas these other established brands, they have news channels, they have...
Yeah, they're doing stuff that a lot of people are doing. You know, they've built an app. Wow,
right.
My goodness, genius. They've built an app. Anyone can build an app these days. It's incredibly simple. Kids are building apps. So in a sense, all this is to me is this sort of distance between young people who know what they're doing with technology. ISIS are no different. And I suppose the older generation looking at them, feeling rather terrified that they have seemingly this sort of remarkable talent for modern technology.
Okay, now you collected, I think you surveyed 13,000 Facebook supporters of kind of the right-wing parties here in Europe, and you just mentioned the BNP here. Yeah. You know, what have you learned about, I mean, terrorism is just a word, isn't it? One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, et cetera. So are these groups similar in what they're using? I mean, you just kind of mentioned it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was looking at the Facebook supporters of different sort of anti-establishment far-right parties. And, you know, I mean, in the end with these people, I sort of found that for a lot of them, they're just incredibly frustrated with how society's going. They feel rather left behind. They feel like the political establishment is utterly out of touch with their concerns. They don't represent them in any way. They feel terrified that the values of their country, whether it's like French values, British values, potentially even European values, are being steadily eroded, steadily chipped away by this strange combination of mass immigration, multiculturalism, and out-of-touch establishment, which is a sort of weird blend of media and government people, all to the detriment of their culture. And they're frustrated, and they feel like they want to speak up, they want to do something about it. A lot of them are not raving racists who want to deport everybody. They just, I think, feel that their culture and their community in the last 20 years especially has changed rather dramatically without them ever having had a say over that. And that's how I see most of the supporters of these parties, sort of disgruntled, frustrated, angry, but Democrats, people that still do believe in politics. Now, they're slightly different from your Anders Breivik types, your like neo-Nazis who are willing to murder people, who are white supremacists, who want to get rid of people of minority background. And I think the problem is sometimes we push them all together. We make them all into this big one lump. But that's not fair. And I think in democracies, you need difference. You need people to be controversial. You need to be tough enough to accept that people are going to say things that you find offensive and controversial. But you know what? Democracy is a way of dealing with that. And it's big enough to deal with that. So in writing these papers, I hoped also a little bit to humanise those people, to understand what they're really saying, what they're really frustrated about, and make sure that, these people have a right to say what they think. They have a right to express their opinions. And frankly, the more you try and shut them down, the angrier they're going to get. So let's try and bring them in. Take them seriously. Don't patronise them. Listen to what they've got to say. Debate with them. Discuss with them.
You met with one of them. I think you called him Paul, was a neo-Nazi from Northern England.
He was at the radical end of that spectrum.
Oh, he was, okay.
He was really at the radical end of that spectrum.
Can you tell me a bit about what you thought you might find and then what you found when you met him and just your impressions there?
Yeah, it's a story that I suppose is really like many of those in the book, which is I'd formed an impression of this guy based on what I'd seen of him online. Online, Paul really was a virulent neo-Nazi. A sort of one-man propaganda machine who would spend, he later told me, 90% of his time pushing out this sort of white supremacist propaganda. Get rid of the immigrants, we haven't got any space for them anymore, and they're all sneering, violent thugs, whereas white people, by contrast, are beautiful, graceful, intelligent. So when I looked at what he was posting online, and my God, does he post a lot, I thought, this guy is going to be a pretty terrifying individual, and I'm not going to like him very much at all. So I'm waiting I communicate with him for a while, and he agrees to meet me. And
so are you posing as a neo-Nazi
I'm
online?
posing as myself. I'm me and myself.
Right.
I mean, overall, I'm always trying to be myself because I think it's the fairest way of going about this type of research. But he agrees to meet me. So I go up north, this tiny town, I can't tell you where it is, but a small town. It could have been one of hundreds up there. Not very much going on there, pretty run down. And I'm waiting, and he says he's going to meet me at the train station. And I'm thinking, oh, Jesus, I'm like, who's this guy going to be? And you know what? This handsome, friendly-looking dude walks up to me, looks quite trendy, he's got a few tattoos, he looks pretty cool. And he's like, oh, you're right, Jamie, it's me, Paul. I can't believe you've come. It's so nice to meet you. And I'm thinking, who's this? What? Who's this guy? And, you know, immediately I really liked him. For all his terrible views, which I disagreed with virulently, he on a personal level, we got on really well. I felt like we could have been mates in a different world, in a different time. We could have been mates. So on a personal level, when I stripped away the screen, when I saw what he was really like, and I could see his face, I could see how frustrated he was, how few opportunities he had where he was living. There was nothing for him to do. There was no jobs for him. He hadn't had a job since he was 16. And he got sort of warped and sucked into this online world where people listened to him, where he had an identity that meant something, that people would follow him and pay attention to his words. The offline Paul, no one cared about him, and no one was interested.
Right, sounds like my life, by the way. But I think
sounds like a lot of people's lives in a sense that you find you can recreate an identity that's a sort of better version of yourself, that's tailored to a particular community, and you live up to that because you want to keep that community that watches you happy. You're playing to the audience, and that's what he did. So offline, I really liked him. Online, he was appalling.
And you said there was an incident where he had kind of walked by some, fellow, supporters of his party, and he didn't really want to interact with them offline, even though they were of the same thinking. He wanted, because then they might know that he was just him offline.
That was the moment, I think, more than any other, that made me sort of realise what was going on with him. He's walking down to get a sandwich from a petrol station at 3:00 in the morning. One morning after a heavy session of being, guess what, on the internet.
Right.
And he goes and gets a sandwich, and as he's going down there, he sees three blokes walking past him, wearing the English Defence League hoodie and the English Defence League caps, chanting English Defence League songs. This is the movement that Paul was a member of, and he never really saw anyone in his town that was from the English Defence League. But rather than speaking to them, he just kept quiet, kept walking, got his sandwich, went back home. And the reason, he said, was because offline, who was he? They didn't know him. I bet they knew who he was online. I bet they knew who he was because he was notorious. But offline, he's just an ordinary guy, and he's quite shy. He's actually quite nervous and shy. Getting behind the screen, however, and it's a different matter altogether. So it was no surprise to me when I thought about it that he would prefer to keep those two bits of his life separate.
Right. Fascinating. You talk about a few other places where you researched. One of them I'd love to hear your thoughts on, which was the Silk Road, which has now been constructed and torn down and reconstructed in various different iterations. Yeah. You gave a talk recently at Google where you asked the audience who had been on the Silk Road of 20-somethings, and one raised their hand. I was wondering what you found when you went to this, dark net via Tor browser Silk Road, and what were your impressions?
So the Silk Road is one of many markets that are operating on the Tor hidden services using this Tor browser that allows you to browse the internet more or less anonymously, and it's very hard to shut down the site. So it's a bit of a free-for-all, and there's all sorts on this Tor hidden service network, which is sometimes called the darknet. But the most, I think, popular bit of the site is probably the marketplaces. And the Silk Road was one of the biggest, but like I said, there's many others. Now, the amazing thing when you sign into to the Silk Road is just the sort of how familiar it all looks. Anyone that's been onto Amazon or eBay would immediately know what to do. The only difference is the products that they're offering are obviously completely different to what you find there.
Yeah.
It's not just drugs that are for sale on these markets, although that's the main fare. It's more or less anything. And actually, in April of this year, the most popular item on the Silk Road was fake £20 Tesco vouchers. They were being sold for about £8 each.
It's fascinating to see what is actually of value and what isn't, because the market self-selects. I mean, it exists where there's demand, right?
Right, so this is the key to the Silk Road. Now, everybody talks about the Silk Road and goes on about how clever it is because it does, you use Tor to get to it. You pay with Bitcoin, which is a pseudonymous cryptocurrency that's hard to trace, and you give your address where the drugs are posted with pretty good privacy encryption key, so it obscures, so it makes it difficult to decipher where your address is. All that stuff, brilliant, very clever. But the real trick, the real secret of the Silk Road is actually customer service. That's what keeps it together, because what's happening there is it's like Amazon in the sense that it is a genuinely functioning marketplace. Hundreds of vendors offering thousands of products. The key is, how do you choose between them? Everyone, like on Amazon, has a little picture, a little product, description, and it has a price, and it has a vendor.
Right. It looks maybe like eBay did in 2006.
Looks like eBay. Right? Yeah, that sounds about right.
Right.
Sounds about right.
For the record, I have been on the Silk Road. I said it.
But the real secret is that the user reviews. So just like on Amazon, people that buy products, probably even more than on Amazon, people that buy products feel obligated to rate the product they have received.
Right.
They give it a score out of 5 and they give it a product description. So was it good? Was the purity good? Was the packaging good? Was the value for money good? And so on. Now what this does is create, of course, a functioning marketplace. You've got competition and choice. And what happens in a marketplace when you have competition and choice? The price starts going down and the quality starts going up. Of course it does. And as a result, the drug dealers on the Silk Road are among the most attentive, most polite people you'll ever find on the internet. Believe it or not. So,
I'm so glad you articulated that, Jamie. Because it's more than a marketplace, it's like a community. It's almost like people have left the breadcrumb trail of the dark that they've gone through for the people behind them to find where to go and to give those reviews and to say, look out for this guy or stay away from this guy. That's
right. It's an incredibly interesting community of people who are sort of committed for various reasons to keeping these online marketplaces up. For many of them, actually, they see it as more than just about drugs. They see it as a sort of digital front on a war for individual freedom.
Right. If you saw the open letter from the Dread Pirate Roberts or whoever is that guy, if you see his manifesto that used to be up there, it was about, by doing this, by this market existing, we are making a statement to the world. It's less about you can buy some weed here. It's more about this is our right.
That's right. Of course, there are people that are on there because they just want to get a score. But the people behind it, definitely, they feel like they're part of a social revolution, Now, and they're in a funny way, they're sort of proving it to be true because the market works very, very well. I browsed a lot of different vendors to try and find someone that would sell me a tiny amount of marijuana. Because obviously I was worried about, didn't want to break the law too seriously.
Right.
So I'm emailing.
But you had to get involved.
I felt like to write this book honestly, I had to actually go through the process of making a purchase, yes. Risky, but important. So I'm emailing these vendors, asking them, and they're just unfailingly polite and they're responsive. You email them, a couple of hours later, you get a response. Dear sir, thank you for your inquiry. Yes, we would love to do, why don't you try this 1 gram of this Afghan Kush? It's fantastic. I hope we can do business together, Get back to me with any questions. Best wishes. It's really like you're dealing. You're the customer. You're the king. They are going to respond to you. And, as a result, probably the most surprising thing I found there was the overall satisfaction scores. I managed to pull off the Silk Road 120,000 reviews that people had left about their products. Average score out of 5 was about 4.9. We're talking about some very, very satisfied people out there.
Right. Is there an Amazon average? I'm guessing
it ain't going to be as high as that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, you know, and the thing is, of course, that creates something of a dilemma for people who work in the drugs industry, because it makes drug buying far safer. The purity is more predictable, which is really good. A lot of people overdose because they don't know what they're actually taking. The Silk Road provides some kind of consumer-led mechanism that gives you some sort of quality assurance. You take away a lot of the street dealing, which is where a lot of the social costs associated with drugs takes place. But it makes it far easier to get hold of far more drugs.
Right.
So you're suddenly faced with this dilemma that actually, in the beginning, when I first went on the site, I was sort of appalled, and I thought, this is terrible. This is awful for society. After I'd finished the book, I wasn't quite so sure.
I read a quote that you said, ultimately, that access to drugs will tend towards higher levels of use and drug use. So you think that might create more misery. Do you still feel that way?
Well, yeah, but it's partly that, experts in the drugs field will tell you that how difficult it is to get a drug is the main driver of whether people will take it or not. And so if it's very easy to get hold of heroin or crack cocaine, then more people will get hold of it. And frankly, there are some pretty bad health and social costs for individuals and all of us associated with high levels of use of particularly those Class A drugs.
Yeah.
Now, the other problem, of course, is that if you create an anonymous marketplace, you sort of don't get to decide what's bought and sold there. So it isn't only drugs. It is also, the Silk Road does have a few rules attached, but it is also, on some of the other sites, it is also weapons. It is also fake identification. It is also hacking services, like, would you like to buy my hacking services? And for some of those things, I think because that's less about individual liberty and more about directly doing harm to other people, I'm less comfortable with that. And the problem is, once the cat's out of the bag and you make an anonymous marketplace that functions, how are you going to control it? Anything can be bought and sold.
Right.
So it keeps getting more complicated the more you think about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Yeah, I had two thoughts on that. We had Howard Marks in here, who is the infamous, marijuana smuggler, book written about him, Mr. Nice, that he wrote, movie, etc. And he said something really interesting when he was here. He said, Brian, I know people that won't take drugs because they're illegal. And my co-host at the time said, what are you talking about? And he said, just the fact that they're illegal will keep a certain percentage of the citizens away from them. Like you said, if you don't have the crack, you won't necessarily take the crack. So he says there is something there. I've also had Professor David Nutt in here, and Professor Nutt talks about knowing what you're getting. And, when you have these deaths from MDMA overdose, it's because no one knows what the quality is, and no one knows the dose. And so that's when you get deaths and all these things. So Professor Nutt would be one to say, let's get it out there. Let's get it regulated. Let's know what you're buying, and then you'll actually find out that these drugs are much safer than alcohol and tobacco, and then he goes down that route. So
and that's the dilemma, and in a sense, I suppose what the Silk Road proved to me more than anything, it was quite an interesting revelation, I think, was that, it wasn't necessarily that it gave me a roadmap for how we should deal with illegal narcotics. I could see the benefits of there being a regulated market or even a free market. I could see the risks. What it reminded me of was the power of the market to act in the interest of a consumer. More than anything else, I saw how people who are desperately trying to get hold of drugs on the streets, getting ripped off because it's a monopoly and a cartel, suddenly the power dynamic changes in the market and the consumer is the person that drives the deal. And it sort of renewed my faith in the market as the best way of allocating resources. And I didn't expect to find that on the Silk Road at all, I can tell you.
You're a goddamn capitalist, Jamie.
Well, the Silk Road's making one of me.
That's an interesting observation. One thing you noted is as soon as it gets shut down, something else gets restarted, and in multiple iterations it gets restarted.
Incredibly innovative places. Innovative because they are on the fringes. Because the FBI is always trying to shut them down. They're always learning. They're always figuring out new ways of avoiding detection. They're becoming more decentralized. And as a result, my prediction is they ain't going anywhere.
Right.
And they're going to keep getting bigger. And the other thing here, they're constantly coming up with interesting new ways of reaching out to consumers. I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years there'll be a Silk Road app. Download your app. I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years you'll be able to buy drugs from the online marketplace that will be delivered to your house that night. Because let's face it, a lot of people are, how should we put it, impulse buyers, and they don't want to wait 3 days for the delivery. And if they can crack that market, it's a game changer. And I've seen stuff on the Silk Road that it was absolutely remarkable. A couple of months ago, somebody on the Silk Road was selling organic free trade cocaine that they claimed was not sourced from a dodgy Colombian warlord or a bent copper, but was sort of homegrown stuff from a Guatemalan farmer. And what's more, they were promising to reinvest 20% of any profits they made into local education programs in Guatemala. This is what a market can do.
I love this stuff. Look out, Ransom, is all I have to say. All right, as we continue our journey through the dark web, where do we go? Let's take a left turn and get into either the online sex trade or the live pornography, or what did you see of that? I know you were, again, in a room with some, girls being naked online. You really immerse yourself, Jamie.
I did it for the readers.
I'm sure a few times you said, "I'm doing this for the book," when you were when you were about to do things you didn't want to do.
Yeah, that was one of the easier things to do.
What happened there?
Well, I think I was a little bit naive, to be honest. I hadn't really heard much of this webcamming industry. This is where particularly young women perform sexually explicit acts at home on their web cameras to thousands of anonymous viewers who will tip them, who will pay them if they like what they see. Simple concept.
Right.
But it's being, I'm estimating about 30,000 or so women are doing this around the world.
Okay, around the world. And and with broadband speeds going up, you can literally be anywhere.
You can be anywhere. And I think the point really is this, that this sort of sector of the adult industry, the adult entertainment industry, is the only one that is growing, the only one that is financially viable. It's a classic story of sort of the decentralization of an industry. So suddenly, to make decent pornography, you used to need, a studio like this. Maybe even, I don't know what you do outside of this show, but you need a studio
pay
like
the bills
this.
Around here.
So it was pretty expensive. It's
right,
a lot of
and you would need proper cameras and the editing.
Cameramen, all of that stuff.
Sure.
Now what you need is a decent broadband and a webcam, and you can make decent homemade pornography filmed in real time that responds to individuals' requests and preferences. And so, as a result, people have spotted there's a really decent market opportunity here. I can just go straight to market. I can go straight to the consumer, and if there's enough people contributing small amounts of money, I can actually make decent amount for myself. So this is how I found Vex. Vex, who is one of the UK's leading webcam models, and who performs a show probably 2 or 3 times a week on her webcam from her home to her thousands of viewers who tip her very generously indeed. And she makes, more money than I do, working probably 1 or 2 days a week doing it. I mean, she's an incredibly good performer. Make no mistake about that. She's very, very talented. She was gracious enough. I was very surprised, but she was gracious enough to allow me to attend in person one of her shows. So it was actually a rather strange experience, because I'm sitting there having a coffee with her thinking, I'm going to have to ask her to go to a show. This is going to be really embarrassing, but I have to ask her. Before I could even ask, she said, "Oh, Jamie, why don't you come along to one of my shows?" And I was like, well, if you insist, yeah, that would be great. So 6 weeks after that, I found myself, in this messy bedroom in Leeds in the north of England, sitting there just as far as I am from you, slightly off camera, with 3 girls on a bed, ready to perform a 3-hour mammoth sort of lesbian orgy show to 5,000 people that were watching from home.
3 hours.
3 long hours.
I haven't been online in a while. Wow. Okay. Wow.
If I may, because that's quite an important point, that 3 hours thing. If I may be slightly explicit about this, I'm sure your listeners and
This is the
viewers
place to do
are.
it. Yeah.
You don't need 3 hours to sort of relieve yourself if you're watching pornography. And that's why this show is not just about pornography. It's not just about sex. It was a really interesting sort of social entertainment. There were jokes, they were laughing, playing games. They knew many of the people that were watching. They would communicate with them, talk about all sorts of things. There'd be low moments, there'd be high moments. But these people, they spent the whole they were there for 3 hours watching this. They were chatting away on their keyboards, tapping to each other, sending messages to each other, and the girls would perform depending on what they asked. Now, at the end of the show, a dramatic climax, and I mean that in every sense of the word, they had earned, each of them, I think it was about 300 or 400 quid each for 3 hours work.
Okay.
You know, and it was a strange and enlightening experience, but they deserved every penny of it. And you know, in a funny sense, and it's a little bit like the Silk Road, it made me sort of think about the nature of pornography itself. So a lot of pornography now is absurd, ridiculous, unrealistic, hardcore pornography. This is a very different type. This is real. This is ordinary people in ordinary bedrooms doing ordinary things. Cats wander in and out, there's chat, there's things go wrong, the webcam breaks, someone falls over. That is actually what sex is really like. And so in a strange way, this is a more natural, a more meaningful type of pornography for people to watch.
And like you said, it's not about the climax, because people don't watch that for 3 hours or even an hour or even half an hour. So people are getting more out of this somehow.
They enjoy the show that she puts on.
Right.
I suppose it's a little bit like a weird mix of a burlesque show, right, pornography, a Skype conversation with a girlfriend.
And reality TV.
Right,
okay.
Exactly. And she's incredibly creative, so creative. She's always trying to come up with ways of keeping the sort of something interesting happening in the show. And I interviewed her and some other girls that do this, and they all said the same thing. Sounded like teachers at a school saying the hardest thing is how to keep the lesson exciting. And there's actually a little chat forum for cam girls, and the most popular subject, apart from how do you fill in your tax return, is how do you keep your show interesting. And so she's always looking for interesting new ways of getting things different. So at one moment, she suddenly turns to the camera and says, "Hi everybody, I have a journalist in the room with me today." And I'm sitting there shaking my head thinking, oh God.
I will not go on stage.
No, we didn't agree to this. And then she looks at me and sort of gives me a cheeky smile, and she says, "And he just told me," and I hadn't told her anything, by the way, "he just told me that if you all tip $100 in the next 2 minutes, he's going to come and say hello to you all." And nobody believed I was there. So these guys are all tipping away, tip, 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 ding, 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 ding. Within about 30 seconds, $100 has been tipped. She comes over, grabs hold of me, pulls me onto the bed with these 3 naked women, and I'm just sitting staring at the screen, and I was like, "Hello, everybody." Poor guys, they were not expecting to see my mug on this show.
Can we get that footage?
You know, somebody screen grabbed it and sent it to me, so I do have it. And if you're nice, I'll give it to you, and you can post it.
So your final takeaway from this business, is it just going to grow? Is it going to continue? Is it going to get bigger?
Well, you know, the continued improvement in internet broadband speed, the inevitable improvement in different sort of quality of camera, of visuals, of 3D stuff, of course it's going to grow. You know, you're going to have more immersive experiences, sexual experiences with people based all around the world. We've been talking about this for decades, really. I mean, people have been going on about this since the early 90s. But I think we've started to see it actually happen, and we've seen how it can be a viable business model. There are people, by the way, that do this because they're voyeuristic and they just enjoy it.
Right.
And there are lots of people that do this and earn very little money. Like, dare I say, if I set myself up on these sites and did my show, I don't think I would be quite as successful as Vex. But there are a lot of people that do it just for fun. They're not doing it for the money. So yeah, I think absolutely it's going to continue to grow, and I think that's probably a good thing on balance.
Fascinating. I'm reading your book tomorrow. Let's move through the rest of our adventure here on the dark web. You went into some suicide and bulimia forums. I think you saw a snapshot of that. Can you tell us what did you see there?
Yeah, the suicide and the pro-anorexia forums was very difficult to study, actually. The hardest subject of all, I think. So let's take the pro-anorexia, the pro-bulimia sites. There's thousands of these sites and forums and blogs. They're run by people that suffer with anorexia, which is a very serious eating disorder. And there are thousands upon thousands of young women aged between 13 and 17 in particular that visit them every day.
And they're pro-anorexia.
They're pro-anorexia.
I'm anorexic and proud.
I'm anorexic and proud, and I'm part of a community of people who will support me, help me, encourage me in my efforts of extreme weight loss. Now, I'm going to say one thing about those sites, really, which is I imagine them to be very, very sort of evil and full of mean-spirited people that were trying to cause harm to these young girls. But that is the precise opposite. And that's really why the sites are so dangerous, because they're very supportive. They're a very strong community. They will always be there to listen to you. They're always there to support you. They'll give you encouragement as you're trying to lose weight. They'll post pictures to inspire you. But what they're doing is constantly nudging you imperceptibly towards destructive, sometimes even deadly behaviours. So after a couple of years of girls being on these sites, becoming part of a tight-knit community, where they come to be inured to the things they're seeing and what they're talking about, they're eating 500 calories a day. They're surrounding themselves with images of emaciated bodies that they have come to see as being glamorously skinny. And because they are starving their body of much needed calorific intake, they're incapable of thinking straight. They don't even realise they're ill.
That's a factor, you think, definitely?
That is a huge factor, because if you reduced your calorific intake by over half, you went from 3,000 calories a day, let's say down to even 1,000 calories a day, for any extended period of time, you'd start acting very irrationally. You'd develop body dysmorphia. People start self-harming. You start having sort of obsessional and depressional episodes. And this is what's happening. So it's a strange, a very dangerous combination of a physical and a mental illness wrapped into one, but crucially, all tied together by a supporting, loving community. And that's what makes them so serious and so dangerous, because people who suffer with this illness need somewhere to go where they will find other people to talk to. And at the moment, that is the only place for them to go. So what we need to do is find better alternatives. We need to find non-judgmental online sites for people with anorexia who can go and be honest, but who aren't going to be encouraged to carry on with this really destructive behaviour.
Wow, that's fascinating. I didn't even know that existed. So, yeah, the web has a funny way of, like you said, meeting supply with demand. That's
right. And I think one of the reasons they are there is because the National Health Service and others don't provide anything like this.
Okay.
And so there's a demand there, and they've filled it. And unless we fill it with something better, they're going to carry on going there. You must do it. I do it. I'm sure everybody listening does it. You're feeling a little bit unwell. You've got a weird symptom, especially as you get a bit older, you start getting weird aches and pains in new places. And the first thing you do is start Googling your symptoms. And half the time convincing yourself you've got a brain aneurysm or some blood clot or whatever it is. And then you very quickly get sucked in. And I think you see a little glimpse of it. You get sucked into these little communities where everyone's talking about this stuff. Can be very, very dangerous if you're not careful. And remember, we're talking about adolescent girls. We're talking about 13, 14, 15-year-old girls. And they're eating 500 calories a day. I think it suddenly makes you see just how warped it is, what they're seeing and how they see themselves. They're not thinking like me or you.
Talk to me about child pornography. It's an issue that's been talked about a lot in this country. You happen to meet someone, I think you named him Michael, who consumed it, but you learned the history of him. What did you learn about the whole industry, the habits? Yeah, what was the enlightenment there?
it's one of the most difficult but most misunderstood subjects, I think. And I used Michael as he's a good example of actually, for most of the people that are convicted of being in possession of child pornography, his story is typical. And people might not want to hear it and they might not believe it, but it is typical of those who are convicted of this crime. This is what happened to him. He started off watching legal pornography, but of teenagers, 18, 19. Younger women. Now, the unfortunate and uncomfortable truth is that teenage pornography is by far the most popular category of legal pornography. For whatever reason, that is it. It's the most popular. Millions of people watching it and millions of people making it. Now, he starts there. He then gets offered, because of his browsing history, he then gets offered pop-up other pornography, which is a little bit shady, a little bit more, how do you say, sort of in the grey area. And it's called barely legal, or it's called jailbait pornography. It's typically girls between 14 and 18. That's all illegal, and that is technically child pornography, although for a lot of people it isn't what you'd imagine child pornography to be. Now, there's a huge amount of this stuff, this grey area, and no one quite knows what to do about it. It's illegal, but it's hard to prosecute. The age is the difference between a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old is not always obvious. So he then spends a couple of years watching this pornography, and it becomes something of a release for him. When he's stressed, when he's under pressure, whatever, he goes and watches that type of pornography. And slowly what happens is, much like human nature, he starts pushing at the taboo. He wants to see a little bit further, a little bit younger. He starts getting a sort of attracted by the taboo aspect of what he's seeing. So he goes down another age category.
And he normalizes, as a big theme of your book.
He normalizes. Because it takes place over a couple of years, he stops sort of seeing what it is that he's doing is wrong, because it's such a gradual process. So before he knows it, it's 13 and 12-year-olds. And then a little while later, it's 10 and 9-year-olds. And each time, he's not really searching for it. It just sort of pops up somewhere. Or he finds it as a link that he's linking to something, and that's offered to him as another link. And the truth is that some people in the industry call this the 3-click theory. And that's the chapter title. That from a legal porn site to illegal porn, you can go from just 3 clicks. Because it all sort of links together. And so that's what he did. And so by the end, sort of 3 or 4 years later, he's got 3,000 images, indecent images of children on his hard drive. And he is convinced that he's not done anything wrong. And we're talking about children as young as 8, 9 years old. And he is convinced that they're enjoying it, that there's nothing wrong with it. It's not even illegal. And it's only when the police come knocking on his door that I think it really dawned on him what had actually happened. Now, that is the journey that most people go on. It's not what you'd imagine it to be. It's gradual, it's slow, it's driven partly by stress and by pressure and by normalisation of these images. And there's no way that he'd have jumped straight in to watching kids under 10. No way. But if you go very slowly towards it, each step doesn't seem quite as serious. And then you justify to yourself that it's not so bad. And I think especially because you're not caught straight away, you get away with it for months on end. And so it seems like, well, if I'm not being caught, it can't be that bad, can it? So that's what happened to him. And that's what happens to a lot of men. And I think one of the problems is there is so much of it available, and it is not hard to find. And unfortunately, a little bit like the drugs, if the barriers to entry are sufficiently lowered, more and more people like him who ordinarily wouldn't have looked for this, they wouldn't have sought it out, will get sucked into this world.
Right, and that's where it becomes dangerous, having everything accessible, kind of like you were saying, having the crack cocaine everywhere.
Exactly, because for some people it is going to cause a serious, serious harm. And the more people that consume this stuff, the more images are going to be made, the more kids are going to suffer. So it's a really difficult subject because it's close to impossible to entirely remove this content from the internet. The way that the Tor hidden services work, it's like a recycling factory. It's people can upload illegal images onto these sites that are very hard to shut down, and everyone can just upload them, a bit like YouTube, and then everyone can then download them as well. So then each time a site is knocked offline for whatever reason, thousands of people around the world have all those images on their hard drives, and they just re-upload them again. We've essentially distributed and decentralized the supply of images and multiplied them so much that in 1990 the NSPCC, the body that is for the protection of children, estimated, I think, that there were 7,000 indecent images of children in circulation in the UK. A couple of years back, the National Crime Agency found one offender with over 1 million images on his computer. It's just a completely different scale of problem. Now, it's 1 million images is strange to me because it sort of suggests that people aren't collecting it only to watch it. You can't look at 1 million images of anything.
Right.
People collect it.
Is that a hoarder?
There are people that collect it because they just like having a big collection. It's inside the community, and yes, it is a community of people. There is a certain pride to having the largest collection. There's certain classics that everyone wants to have. And it takes on this sort of the paedophile community takes on all the traits of any other community of people. There's jealousies, there's rivalries, there's competition for who has the best material, there's arguments amongst themselves. And again, that sort of suddenly struck me that even in the sort of darkest depths, there's very familiar human traits to be found.
Right. Is there any takeaway or any conclusion you make from understanding that normalization process? Is there a way that you can say, okay, because we know that, now we can do this?
You know, I think really in the end, the whole of my book concluded with a similar line, which was each of us now has more power and freedom over the ability to access things, to communicate with people, to download things, to cause harm, to purchase things. We just have more freedom and power than ever. And ultimately that requires us to be more responsible with it, to be more discerning about what we do, to be more aware of the risks for ourselves, because we're going to have to take more responsibility ourselves over what we do. And I think part of the reason for writing this book was, you know, people need to be aware of the normalization of bad things. So I would love it if somebody else who is dabbling in this grey area of quasi-legal jailbait pornography reads that chapter and thinks, you know what, I better stop here because I can see where this could take me. And that was the purpose of writing my book, really, to get people thinking, to get people aware.
Right, because when it's peer-to-peer that way, when you're a consumer, you're also a distributor. So when you're part of the, you're part of the problem, you exacerbate the problem. It's not a victimless crime. It's not a one-off. It can kind of continue to spiral.
That's exactly right.
Recently I was up in Scotland for a week, and I found myself not connected, not online. And I found that normally, before I would go to sleep and I would check a Twitter feed or check an online, news site, I didn't have the option. And I just realized that much of the time I was using it as a distraction and an addictive distraction, and it was absolutely not necessary, and there was value to me being with my own thoughts. And I just really noticed for the first time about how, and I do a lot of things offline, like talking to you right now, so I'm maybe even a bit more normal than some people that really live a lot of their lives online. And I know you made an interesting conclusion at the end about the time that we spend online and offline, and I just wondered what your conclusion was from a lot of the research you did.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I sort of have quite a strict rule with myself now that I try not to look at any internet stuff after 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Because I'm doing the same. I'm just checking it for no reason.
Right.
It is an addiction, and
it is.
You have that. Have you ever had that feeling on your leg where you think it's like what it was called phantom phone ringing?
Yeah, was that a vibrate?
You feel like it's vibrating and there's nothing there. Yeah. Because apparently it's so hardwired into us to desire affirmation, communication with other human beings that we'll find, we need it. We die without it. And social media sites in particular are brilliant at this because they've worked out that's our oxygen. So so I concluded a couple of things from all of this, from the whole experience. And one was I really took from it that I guess I'd also built all these people up to be monsters in my head. that they were demons, that they were nasty, they were terrible people. And I guess once I met them in person, and it didn't matter whether it was internet trolls, or people that make homemade porn, or even, dare I say it, the neo-Nazis and the convicted child sex offender, they were far more interesting, far more multifaceted, far more nuanced in their morality than I'd anticipated. And I think part of the story there is that any time something is obscure, hidden away under the bed, we make monsters of that. We will begin to project our own fears onto them. There's a fascinating, people always talk about the internet disinhibition effect, that because you're behind a screen, you're nastier to other people because you're not accountable for it. But I think the other side of that is you judge other people more harshly when they're communicating from a screen as well. And there's a fascinating quote, a lovely quote from George Orwell when he talks about how in the Spanish Civil War, which he went to go and fight with the communists, that he found himself pointing a gun at a Nazi who was fleeing. And suddenly this Nazi that was fleeing stumbled over his trousers because his trousers were falling down, and he was running, trying to keep his trousers up at the same time. Quite a comical image. And he said, I couldn't shoot this man. I had come to Spain to shoot Nazis. This was a man running away trying to hold his trousers up. He's not a Nazi, he's a man who's trying to desperately run while having one hand on his belt. And it suddenly changed the way that he saw this individual. Not a one-dimensional Nazi, but a human being. And that's the sort of experience that I had. The neo-Nazis online, they're human beings as well. And you learn a lot from going to meet them. And then the second bit, which is the thing that you just mentioned really, I guess I found myself feeling rather depressed after a year of this, immersed in all of these subcultures. And I reflected on why that was, and I suppose I imagined it was because I'd surrounded myself with very dark and difficult subjects. But I don't think that was it. I think what really was behind my sort of mild sort of malaise that I'd found myself in was that I'd sacrificed so much of my offline life. I hadn't been out with friends. I hadn't been going and spending time with my family. I hadn't been reading books. I hadn't been playing sport, whatever it is that we do. I'd been spending all my life lived through this tiny box, staring at a screen from 6 inches away until the dark hours of the night. And that's such a reductive experience for a human being. And so I think that in the end, it was the cost, what I was missing out on by being online 24 hours a day that was making me down. And that is why I began this rule that I've stuck to of trying to stay offline for at least 2 or 3 hours every evening before I go to bed. And it works.
Part of me wants to laugh that that's your online diet. It's not an anorexic diet by any means. So tell me about, we had an MP resign recently over a tweet or something like that. And we had this real culture of kind of a shaming culture when someone kind of is out of line. And I just wondered what you see this from a social perspective. Is that us, hating ourselves or getting together, for this kind of social media shaming that happens on a more and more regular basis these days?
I'm really worried about this. I'm really worried about this because I think what's happening is public figures have realised that they need to be online, they need to get into the space, they need to debate, they want to speak to people, they want to hear from people directly. And politicians in particular, with their duties of being representatives, they see that social media is a brilliant way of hearing people and talking to people. But what's happened as a result is this sort of new political tactic of trying to dig up dirt on what people have said, either in the past, like trawling back through someone's Facebook page from 5 years ago and seeing something silly they said, or monitoring every post, every picture, everything they ever put online, and then trying to turn it into something that can be used against them. That, I suppose, in a sense, is quite a predictable political strategy. I talked about that 6 months ago, that it would mark this election, that it would be all about social media dirt digging. And frankly, it's infantilizing. It's infantilizing for the viewers. It's pathetic. I think what's the real risk here is that people, politicians in particular, will become terrified of saying what they really think. They'll become terrified of being able to speak their mind online for fear that it will be taken out of context, for fear that it will be used against them in a press briefing, or it will be blown out of all proportion. And what we may end up with is politicians that are even more boring, dull, and on message than what we have already. And I think most of us can agree that is not where we want politics to go.
It's hard to imagine.
It's hard to imagine, but there's nearly always a lower level to which politics can reach if you give it the chance.
So what is the future of one's digital footprint? Is it one that you think in 10 years from now it's going to be something that no one talks about because everyone's got a dirty footprint, or will it be, cleansed so much?
It's going to go one of two ways, and I desperately hope that enough people post enough controversial, offensive things that everyone will get used to it.
Right.
That actually we won't be bothered by dirty footprints.
Right.
Because frankly, we've all got it. And a strange thing is that for internet trolls, that part of what they're trying to do is that. They're trying to say nasty things just to make sure everybody, I suppose, is kept alert. And I hope it goes that way, because I think for a democratic society, that is a much healthier direction than this sterilized, cleansed social space where everybody is saying exactly what they think they're supposed to say. That is not what social media should be for. It should be raucous, it should be difficult, it should be offensive sometimes. And I hope and I pray that it remains that way.
Yeah, I don't think we might get there. Right now, we're not going that way, are we?
No.
I once mentioned during one of our shows that, Obama had come out with one of his books and talked about his open use of cocaine and marijuana. And I was like, and then once he addressed it, then he moved on. And then one of my guests said, yeah, but there's no YouTube video of him doing a line. And they're like, that would make a difference. And I was like, maybe that would make a difference.
Maybe that would make a difference. Well, what might happen is it will make a difference for the first few people that it happens to.
And then that would be normal.
And then in 10 years after that, they won't bother with that anymore.
Right.
So yeah, it's gonna happen. Of course it's gonna happen. But I think we're going to get used to that as well.
Right.
Especially if the Silk Road continues to grow. So.
Yeah, I think everyone's going to have a footprint in 10 or 20 years that, you don't have a picture of you smoking weed when you're 15. Well, why not? Everyone else does, and so. Well,
your politics politics has also become about being authentic, being normal. I'm an ordinary person. I've done the stuff you've done.
Right.
And so actually,
Obama kind of did that.
Well, yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So. And you see a lot of the language that politicians use, they're trying to be like the ordinary man on the street, even when they're not. So there's no reason to think that it wouldn't be the same with what videos are available about them. Embarrassing pictures of them being really drunk and doing this and doing that, stupid stuff, posting rubbish. That is what all of us do. So damn it, our politicians should have been able to do that as well. Right, indeed. Do you think we're going to look back at the 2000s and 2010s, the way that we look back at, say, the 1920s in America, where, heroin and cocaine were legal and people were getting addicted, or they were smoking in the 60s and doctors were saying, choose Lucky Strike? You think we'll look back as these social media dark days when we should have known better not to get these addictions, and will now in 20 or 30 or 50 years be these kind of Zen individuals that know that online should be taken in small measures, or is the future something very different? I mean, I'm really hesitant about making any predictions because this is your field. This is people consider that I know something more about it, which is why I'm even more hesitant, because they might think that I am very confident in my predictions, and I'm not. What I would, I suppose, hint at is that I imagine we'll have some inequalities in society about how we use the internet. So you will have the well-educated, the well-integrated individuals who will be far more sensible and, I suppose, far more balanced about their digital footprints, and they'll work out how to spend their time online effectively and how to make sure they have a good work-life digital balance. And there'll be others who don't. There'll be others that will become more addicted, and it could be a new type of inequality in society. Right. Because I think of all the different lessons that you learn about looking back across history about technology, one is that the way that it's taken up usually results in some inequalities between the people that are doing it well and it's helping them, and the people that aren't and it's hindering them. And I imagine that is going to be the same for all this social media stuff. Beyond that, I really wouldn't like to speculate.
Okay, fair enough. What is next on your plate? What is the big project that's next, or the book, or I'll dare say, what is going to be written on Jamie Bartlett's obituary as what did this man do?
That's absolutely. Well, but obituaries, I mean, I'll probably have a tombstone that's a digital tombstone, which is a revolving and constantly updating story of my life, of my social media data.
I thought of that months ago. I'm like,
right.
You go in on a
yeah,
big
why
touch
not?
screen.
Why would you? Why wouldn't you? Why would you just have a gravestone?
Right? You see
why
the
would
history
you not
of my
have
life.
History of my life.
Yeah.
Like, do you want to zoom in, touch screen? Look at what I did there.
Watch his London Real interview, everything.
Why why not?
As opposed to a typical graveyard, it's like, who? I can barely read the name. I don't know anything about him. I don't care.
I want to go and sit, so I want my grandchildren to go to my tombs and they'll be able to remember me rather than just see a tomb. So I don't know what that stuff is going to be yet, and I hope it will be interesting and fulfilling and people will enjoy it. And I just want to write stuff that gets people thinking. I don't care whether they disagree with me, and I don't mind being controversial, but I feel my role in intellectual life is to write stuff that gets people thinking. That's all. And if I've managed to do that, then I'll have managed more than I ever dreamt of. And if I can get some of that onto my digital, constantly updating gravestone, so much the better.
Excellent. Well, maybe we'll get the next book will be kind of Men Who Stare at Goats-ish, where you go down a rabbit hole. I can't wait. Jamie, I ask everyone that comes on the show a couple questions at the end. I'm going to ask you, if you could make a phone call to the 20-year-old Jamie Bartlett and give that young man a bit of advice, what would you tell him?
I probably would have, goodness me. I've got to. It sounds rather self-satisfying, but I don't think I'd tell him anything because I'm rather happy with the way things have turned out and all the mistakes that I've made that I've learned from. I've made loads of mistakes, but I wouldn't want to not make those mistakes. I wouldn't want to have circumnavigated what was a natural thing for me to do at the time. So I'd probably wouldn't say I'd probably give him a little bit of advice about style, and the boring sort of inane stuff about enjoying the moment. But the 20-year-old Jamie wouldn't have listened to that anyway, so what's the point? So I probably would have just, walked on by, gone to a coffee shop, had a little coffee, and then come back here again. Because I'm rather a little bit like any of those Back to the Future things. I would not be giving myself a copy of the almanac.
Right.
Because my life would have gone in some way terribly badly, undoubtedly, and I'm relatively satisfied that I'm on the level at the moment, and I wouldn't want to risk changing it.
Okay, well said. The second part of that question is best advice you've ever received: business, personal, writing.
They're really difficult questions, and I've never been asked questions like this before. I think. With writing, the best advice I ever received was that writing is a lot more, it's more about editing than it is writing. So much of the good stuff that you do is not in the writing itself, it's in when you've written words and then you give yourself the time to think about them, change them, play around with them. I think Ernest Hemingway said, always write drunk but edit sober.
Yeah.
And that is a really, really good piece of advice for anyone that's trying writing out. And just keep writing. There's no such thing as a sort of a bad practice. You just keep going, and you learn an awful lot just from the way that you write. Beyond that, again, I don't want to give any sort of silly and unnecessary and sort of dull pieces of advice. And that's what I'm here to talk about is a book. That was the best piece of advice.
That's good advice.
That I received about writing.
They say writing is rewriting. That's another way of saying that.
Yeah.
And then I think it was Mark Twain that once wrote someone a note and said, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time. So again, edit what you write. And that's what takes time. Final part of that question is, to the 20-year-old that's listening to us around the world, could be in Brazil, China, anywhere, who wants to, make a difference, who wants to do something that's going to affect some change. What do you tell them? What's a way for them to get active?
I think that what the internet and social media is offering is just a remarkable array of ways for people to change the world. I used to think about changing the world as being something that, the big superhero would come along and fix everything. But I realised that each of us can play a very small role in a much bigger change. Every purchase we make online, every comment we leave online, every post we write, everything we tweet and retweet, every email we send is also in some senses a political gesture. You're putting things out into the public domain about what you think, what you feel, what you want to happen with your society. Each of those may be minuscule, but each of those, when part of the whole, begin to sort of create the social, cultural environment in which big changes happen. So I want people to think that everything they do is in some sense is political, and even if they can't see the change of what they're doing directly, it is all creating this much larger sort of messy and complicated environment in which the world does change, and I think will change for the better in years ahead. So I think it's a terribly exciting time, and I think everybody can and must play a role in doing that with every little thing they do.
Right, including personal interactions as well.
Absolutely right.
Although those don't get saved forever.
I've got digital on my mind, but of course it's the personal interactions that matter most.
What I've read of your book that I saw on Amazon is fascinating, fantastic. How do people get a copy? Is Amazon the best way, or what's the best?
Well, I mean, but I'm a big fan of local bookstores, right. Independent bookstores. A lot of those are selling it. All the bigger bookshops are selling it too. It's currently only available in hardback, which is available in the shops and on most of the online retailers. You can get it direct from Random House as well. E-reader, of course, you can get an e-reader one online, and I think it will be coming out in paperback for those who don't want to spend all their money on the hardback. In January.
Okay, fantastic. I know you're having plenty of success with it. You're going around talking about it. I just love the fact that you're willing to go places other people don't go. You're willing to admit you went on the Silk Road. You went up and watched this online sex event in the web, and then you personalize these stories. Because I always think to myself, all these bad people in the news. I mean, they're people that are around me every day. Is 0.1% of every person I meet the child pornographer consumer? Right. Yeah. So these are your uncles and your aunts and your cousins.
That's right.
And so it's all of us.
That's right. When I get on my bike after this and I cycle back home, I'll be going past people that have done all of this stuff online, and they're ordinary people.
Right.
And they're not just digital avatars, they're human beings, and they're human beings that you will know. And I think that, I suppose, above all, is the message of the book.
Yeah, and if you have any sense of community or even collective consciousness, you can argue that a small percentage of you is that person, and so it's up to you to help, to make yourself better, to make these interactions better, because we really ultimately have this kind of responsibility for our people as we go forward. And the older I get, the more responsible I feel, of leaving something important behind, teaching the younger kids to do things in a better way. So it's a fascinating way of looking at things, and the internet pushes it right back in our face, doesn't it? Because it's a reflection of us. Isn't it?
That's right.
And the dark net is a reflection of our dark side.
That's absolutely right.
Right. There you go. Jamie, this has been one of my most favorite episodes in this entire year. Thank you so much for coming. This has just been so much fun. Everyone's going to love this show. And I can't wait to keep reading your Twitter feed and hearing more about you. So thank you so much. As we say on London Real, it's about the journey. I wish you well on yours, and all the best.
Thank you very much indeed.
All right. Take care.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.
This week on London Real, we have Edward Snowden's attorney, Jessalyn Raddick.
Edward Snowden made the only choice he could make, which was to go outside of the United States to blow the whistle. What we're going through now, people should be marching in the streets over what NSA is doing. There has been so much fear-mongering by the government that they've been able to create an entire surveillance state.
And former NSA executive turned whistleblower, Thomas Drake.
What I was blowing the whistle on was government illegality, violations of the Constitution, massive fraud, waste, and abuse and wrongdoing. This was raw power. This is the government saying, you know what? 9/11 is our excuse. We're just going to get the data. I was facing 30, 35 years plus in prison.
To send a chilling message.
To whom?
To other whistleblowers, to others in the government.
If you dare hold up a mirror to the government, if you dare speak truth to power or of power, we're going to hammer you and hammer you good.
On Sunday, London Real presents Jesselyn Raddick and Thomas Drake, NSA whistleblower.
We just don't do this to Americans. That's why we had an American Revolution.